Hey guys, Cat7 here. Okay, it is Thursday, March 25th, 2021, and I want to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. All right, guys. Well, you know how I like to do these interesting videos in between doing the videos on the quote unquote giants or large hominids, as I like to call them, but I like to do these related articles on them. And as it turns out, I one week there, Chris Leslie's Greater Ancestors Museum site was down, and I wanted to do the video on Egypt, the giants in Egypt, which I just did previous video, and I thought that was really very interesting. It just had that Indiana Jones feel about it. One main account there. We just sort of imagined what was going on with that account there, and it was just fascinating. But I had searched around because I didn't know what was going on with the website there. It could have been, being attacked, or Chris might have had to take it down. Who knows? But I got to get in touch with him at some point and have a conversation with him. And I was looking around. I found, an article about, one of these large skeletal remains, mummified remains found there about some particular, royalty there in Egypt. And again, it was laughable. I was laughing about it because the article stated that the person was obviously suffering from gigantism again, or every single giant skeleton that's dug up is having some gigantism issue. I guess which doesn't make any sense at all because gigantism is extremely rare. So how could everyone that thousands of skeletal remains that have been unearthed that are rather large, all of them are suffering from and these are in contemporary times that I'm strictly talking about here because this is the absolutely knee jerk explanation for what's going on. So anyway, Harry Hubbard had sent me an email and about this article that he found in this Archaeology Today magazine, online magazine here. And, Harry Hubbard and I are pretty tight. And, we've had a lot of long conversations on the phone. And, he wanted to come on the radio when Jimmy the Paleo Mountain Man and I, Jimmy knew somebody up there in Bellows Falls, Vermont, which is where I stayed at when I was with Jimmy on our exploits there in 2018 around Vermont, looking at all these fantastic stone constructions and walls there. And here's Harry. He wanted to come on the show and talk about the stone walls, give his insights into the stone walls, which he did, which was excellent. And many of those radio shows that I did with Jimmy on WOOL there in Bellows Falls, Vermont, were excellent. So we talked about so many aspects of the stone walls that maybe nobody really ever contemplated, including the terra preta in the area there that I talked about with Mike and Jared Murphy on Conflict Radio interview that I did with them. And, it figures heavily into, some of the sort of ancient technology that these people were involved with. But so anyway, Harry sent me this article here, and it just gives you a bit of hope about, what may be going on in some veins of at least archaeology or anthropology today, where, some of these people are saying, wait a second, maybe it's not gigantism. Maybe these people are actually this tall, and there's no explanation for it because, according to mainstream research on the history and of human height, human beings have been basically the same height since the Stone Age, which would be about 5'3" to 5'5", 5'6" in some areas or whatever it is. But you have to be able to explain these things. This always has to be explained with better diet, better health, more just practices, it's whatever it may be. You can't just have this thing coming out of nowhere. So, as the Frisian giants, there's no explanation for why they are so tall there and everything today. So it's, again, it's just whatever it is. It's these people are huge and there just isn't any explanation for it, and we have no idea, and we're not going to get into it anymore because we don't care. Just leave it as a mystery and forget about it, because this is what they've been trained to reiterate. But it's, again, it's an account, these accounts that maybe contemporary accounts that you never hear about, and this would be one of them. And it's interesting what it says here. Of course, archaeology world is not particularly, I wouldn't say it was mainstream, alternative, whatever. They're just reporting on all of these things. It doesn't matter what it is, wherever they can get a story from. Just like many of these sites, they report mainstream, they report alternative, they report anything that's a story, because they're selling they're hawking their thing here. So whatever. But let's take a look at this article here, because it's very interesting what they say in it. So let's see what it says here, and it's from 2020. And here, by the way, is the article in Live Science, Baloney Science, of the ancient Egyptian pharaoh, maybe the first known giant, suffering from gigantism, of course. So here they mention gigantism here, just to repeat it again and again to you. So, this is what you think about it. But, you know, there's no proof of any of the stuff. It's just, look, clear signs of gigantism. Skeletons long bones showed evidence of exuberant growth, which are clear signs of gigantism. Of course it is. Can't be anything else. You got to stick to the narrative. So let's look at this article from 2020. That was from 2017, I believe, and see what it says. Ecuador exposes skeletons of an ancient race of giant humans, 7 times bigger than modern humans. So here's where archaeology world is sort of picking up on the second part of this article, but it isn't the main part of this article. Okay, it's just like sensationalized title here. You know how it goes. But in any case, according to a research team led by British anthropologist Russell Dement, strikingly tall skeletons uncovered in the Amazon region of Ecuador and Peru are undergoing examination in Germany. Will these remains prove that a race of tall people existed deep in the Amazon rainforest hundreds of years ago? Hundreds of years ago. New world. It's new. So it's only got to be hundreds of years ago, see, because it's new. If it was old, then it maybe could be older than that, but because it's new, it's got to be a lot sooner than that. And they got all the geology doctored up to tell you it's new. Oh, the geologists, boy, they kill you, boy. Like Robert Thorson, he's the expert on stone walls, and he said that the first stone wall in North America was built in the Popham colony in Maine there, and it was, as my research turned out, and I did some debunking videos on my channel, which are extremely popular, by the way. Some of the most views on my channel, and the Popham colony, yeah, it was all the archaeology, I read the archaeological report on it, and there's no colony there. The whole thing was a scam. See, this is what you can hear on my channel, something you never hear anywhere else. Anywhere, guys, about how the supposed early colony in 1607 was one of the first colonial, short-lived English colonial settlements. Baloney was what didn't even exist. It was a money scam. So anyway, Thorson claims the first stone wall was built. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. None. But it's like Harry Hubbard on his channel, just comparative analysis of these kinds of scientific things and historical things and old books and actual data and all this kind of stuff. So, you know, a half dozen human skeletons from the early 1400s to mid 1500s were confirmed to have been discovered, varying from 7 feet and 8 feet, 213 and 243 centimeters in height. So rather large there by, would be by historical comparison to average height throughout the world. And why would that be? No explanation, of course, and you're probably never going to get one because they don't want to talk about it. A whole different kind of past than you can ever imagine. Demet told Quentia High Life, "We are very early in our research, and I am only able to provide a general overview of what we have found. I don't want to make claims based on speculation since our work is ongoing. Because of the size of the skeletons, this has both anthropological and medical implications." See, so why would he be saying that? Well, he's saying that because, there's no explanation for that. There has to be specific explanations for these things. You can't get away with just saying this or that, especially when somebody discovers these things in the field, in the discipline, and, they're like, look, this is what it is, and that in this case, in this particular case here, and pretty contemporary here, they're going to have to take a serious look at it, I guess, but it's an uphill battle, and it's probably going to be either dismissed or rationalized or explained away in a way of gigantism or acromegaly, because they'll just say, well, see, all these other skeletons we dug up that were rather large size, they're all suffering from gigantism and acromegaly, so these people must be too, obviously, you see, and just dismiss it that way, especially when this mantra of gigantism and acromegaly is just, repeated and repeated and repeated, so often enough, and then people are going to internalize it and say, well, it's got to be a fact. Of course it does. And sort of against this backdrop of, we know from reading all the accounts of the giants, especially in the Americas, where all these skeletal remains were dug up, they just crumbled into dust for the most part, right? So if they're saying, their findings can identify and pinpoint to exact, specifications based on their own models, that these skulls' pituitary areas show signs of, damage or whatever it is. Well, come on now. If, 98.9% of these skeletons, disintegrated into dust upon being exposed to the air, that would be highly questionable, in my opinion. Okay, based on the evidence, even mainstream evidence, of these skeletal remains being dug up under conditions that they certainly shouldn't have been dug up under, and all disintegrated when they oxidized instantly upon exposure to the air. In late 2013, Dement received word that a skeleton had been uncovered by a Shuar local, approximately 70 miles, 112 kilometers from Cuenca in Loja province, Ecuador. Demon traveled to the site and recovered the rib cage and skull of a female which had been exposed by flooding, which is so many of the accounts that we read about in the Americas, how this also occurred. So, in whatever area you are in the world, when there is some sort of flooding in some areas that seem, accessible, it's a good chance you might be finding ancient giant skull remains based on everything that's occurred in the past. The bones were thought to date to 600 years ago. So, 600 years ago, of course, again, this new world bias just is just so prevalent in these articles about the Americas. It's always so much newer, 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 but it could be new enough. And look, if they said these rather larger giant peoples existed somewhere into the recent past, more recent than we think, or whatever it is, it's certainly possible based on all the accounts and some of the accounts I read about the giants in international now, like the ones in Greenland, for example. This prompted the formation of a research team, including four researchers from Freie Universität in Germany and the assistance of Schwar locals. Funding was provided by the university for excavation and investigation. And I said reported measured 7 feet and 4 inches, 223.5 centimeters in height. So that's a pretty big guy. I stood next to somebody. I'm 5'8", and I stood next to a guy who was over 7 feet tall, who was dating a girl down the street from me, and she was like 5 foot tall. It's some ways comical, not to be mean or anything, just it looked funny. And me standing next to the guy, it's like, holy cow! The guy's like almost double my size. It seemed, even though it wasn't that. But the guy was definitely a giant. Had giant genes. Most of the giant people. So you just chalk it up for them having giant genes. They just still have them. They're still around, and nobody wants to discuss it. Recognizing it is a controversial area of research, Dement noted. Even though I had been working with Frey for many years, I was concerned that they might not give a grant for someone looking for giants. To outsiders, especially scientists, I understand this sounds a little harebrained. Of course, it has to make statements like this to sort of appease the, whatever serious people like, in this own field of academia and discipline are going to be, hanging on his every word. What are you saying there, buddy? Huh? You know, gigantism. Because of the sensational nature of this, we have to be extremely diligent in our research since it will be met with a great deal of skepticism, he said. 3 complete skeletons and 2 partial skeletons had no disfiguration and they were relatively healthy. Demon told Quencha Highlight the skeletons showed no signs of diseases such as the hormonal growth problems that are common in most cases of gigantism. How dare you say that? Don't you know it's gigantism? Haven't you read all our articles agreeing upon it? Yeah, I agree. How about you? You agree? Oh, sure. We all agree. We got to agree. Otherwise, we got to give some other explanation, and we're not going to do that. In all the skeletons, the joints seemed healthy and the lung cavity appeared large. One of the skeletons that we have dated was of a female who was about 60 when she died, much older than typical cases of gigantism. The burials were elaborate. Bodies were wrapped in leaves and buried in thick clay. This sealed the skeletons and protected against water intrusion, leaving the remains in fairly good condition. Legends come to life. Carlos Miguel Vaca Alvarado of the parish of the town of Changaminas, Ecuador, was all his life interested in archaeology, and this motivated him to discover a group of numerous giant skeletons. The bones were about 7 meters high. That's freaking huge. And, talking about these 36-foot skeletal remains, I mean, I gotta see that myself, but I'm not doubting this person's claims or whatever it is that was found there. I think they showed or reconstructed these things at the beginning of this article based on one of the bones. They had like the shin bone or something like that. And okay, so let's suppose for a second it says here the seven fragments of the skeleton were carefully analyzed by many experts who reached the conclusion that those bones were part of a human skeleton 7 times bigger than a modern human being. So, here's this sort of scale references to these skeletal remains that were supposedly unearthed, and historical figures included in there. So, let's suppose for a second that a humanoid creature could be like 36 foot tall. Wow, I bet you could throw around like, 400-ton blocks and stuff like that. Like they were like, play school, wooden play school blocks for an infant. You know what I mean? The strength and power of beings of that size would just be just incredible. And who's to say that that's not really what the story has been? There's no evidence to suggest otherwise. There seems to be more evidence to suggest that there is. We read about so many of these skeletal remains being unearthed in the Americas, especially North America, which seems to be a very intense place for the accounts of the giants. Just probably so many more than any other place around the world. And, so many of these skeletal remains were like 14 and 15 feet tall, 13 feet tall. I mean, these beings, just immense size and strength. Probably not going to need a lot of sort of contraptions and sleds and cranes and all this kind of other stuff when you and your buddies can just like pick one of these things up and put it wherever it's got to go. You know what I mean? Just like we could do today, right? Dry laid stone wall construction, which is Jim Vieira's specialty, all right? A guy who knows something about it. And don't think for a second that the stone walls, for example, of New England aren't some sort of um, polygonal type stone construction. In a very real sense, they are, because in order to make these stone walls, you would have to find the correct corresponding stone to the shape and fit of the stones below it. And in the books that I've read, it seems to be that you would have to have, you know, a, a lot of stones available to you to make those choices. You see, so they fit together more like a puzzle. You see, and in this way, it almost resembles a sort of polygonal stone construction in a way, in its puzzle piece type construction. Okay, it's a very convoluted way. Um, I'm trying to think about the author that I read his book now. I can't think of it right now, but he had said, this it's like a puzzle, putting the puzzle together. There's so many different methods used to put it together in a way with, corresponding stones with corresponding shapes. But then, of course, I talk about these picture walls that nobody else talks about that you can be found here in the Northeast, especially a serpent theme recurring in the stone walls, which is my own personal research, revelation and sort of anthropology here about these rather large hominids and what they did with the stone walls up there, creating these, sort of effigies and pictures in the stone walls and symmetrical shapes, etc., including words. Actually, I'm going to go over that in a future video. It's just amazing stuff. Wait till you see what I'm talking about. Legends say that this region was known as the, quote, cemetery of the gods, unquote, since in ancient times this region was inhabited by giants. Many experts affirm that this place is the lost city of the giants, since many of the pyramids were discovered there and their size reached 80 meters high and 80 meters wide. Moreover, around those pyramids were found numerous objects which were found there, which probably were used for mining. And pay attention to that, okay? So here's a common theme among the giants, it seems. All right, that we can add to their repertoire besides building with stone from probably the most precise um, stone construction of the ancient past, and we can refer to, such as that to be found in Peru, with Sacsayhuaman and all those sites down there and elsewhere, whether it be Egypt or in Japan or wherever you might find it, Russia, all sorts of just everywhere around this planet, right? Are these immense stone constructions, ancient stone constructions, remnants of these things that just seem so just incredible. Okay, so who is handling this stuff? Who cares? Even if they use some sort of same sort of technology that we might use to do the same thing, but only on a giant scale. Are we thinking about that in those terms? It's just you have to see it from the perspective of the giants, and how can you possibly do that? You know? Stand on something very tall, maybe, and take a look around. And now, what do you see? And have to imagine yourself with that sort of power and spirit and everything else. I don't know. I don't think so. Moreover, around those pyramids were found numerous objects. Okay, so mining is something that the giants do. Building with stone is something that the giants do. Among other things, all sorts of things that were probably passed on to all the average sized human beings who probably were their subjects for many millennia in between all these other epics that probably passed with giants and big people and little people and people of all variety kind of things, horns coming out of their heads and whatnot, big heads and big bulbous heads and childlike faces and cone heads and what was going on back then, folks. I mean, just the story is completely untold. The Anunnaki stories, Nephilim, don't even do justice to it. Whatever related things they derive from it. Moreover, around those periods, okay, so experts believe that this place belonged to an unknown, mysterious pre-Inca culture. Okay, unknown, mysterious pre-Inca culture. Well, there's also an you know, unknown, previous, mysterious pre-Mayan culture as well. I mean, nobody talks about that except you can hear about it on my channel. I don't hear a peep from anybody about that except on my channel. And all these other fanciful channels with all these other kooky ideas get billions of views. It's all a bunch of lies and baloney and BS. Okay? Here we talk about practical things, all right? So here's this article. It just wasn't a lengthy article here, but they kind of can't write off defined as gigantism because it's multiple skeletons, okay? They seem to be all in good health, no pituitary gland malfunctions or anything like that. So the problem becomes for them is how do you explain this? Everything that you can see in the universe is an average of something. It's not it's not the exception, okay, or below average, right? Everything you can see is the average. Everything you see is typical. Okay, that makes sense. It puts everything together. That's where the harmony lies. Outside of that exists all these other things that are inexplicable, but they probably aren't those things, only in rare exceptions. So, look, it seems that, if more of these anthropologists and archaeologists would consider these things instead of just going directly to gigantism when he's on see those singular you know excavations of these giant skeletal remains. So right away, the whole singular thing, you got to understand psychology on a different level when it comes to these things, especially because these people have been brainwashed. Okay, you have to understand the psychology, but on a this level, okay, singular skeleton gets unearthed as a giant skeleton. Okay, this is some weird, fellow that was hanging around for entertainment purposes for all these cultures in the past because he had this weird pituitary gland disease that they didn't know anything about, but they had this giant human person with them and they could have their fun with them or put them to work or whatever it is, like Goliath. It just which is Goliath doesn't seem to be suffering from gigantism. The people are all frail and everything. It's just all of these things have to be considered when you refer to these mainstream baloney stories over and over again. Okay, I've caught them on so many issues. Harry Hubbard has caught them on so many issues. All of these things that they come up with are just complete fairy tales, okay, based on, okay, another word for it is hypothesis, all right, just, it becomes one and the same things because they're just making everything up when you read some of these articles and look at some of these things along the size of this thing that it just don't bear out any of their assumptions of what how archaeology world is presenting it. 30,000-year-old stone tools discovered in Mexican caves suggest humans reached America much earlier than thought. Duh. You think so? Come on now. All right. What else did I see in here? Hmm. I think they changed some of these articles as the things go on. Read another one of these things that was just when you read the article, it's just nonsense stories that these people come up with, whoever, whatever anthropologist or archaeologist, because they have to, this is part of their discipline is to sort of make up the narrative based on quote unquote facts. Okay. And when the facts are inexplicable, like, for example, in William A. Ritchie, the head archaeologist in New York State, for example, when they dug up these oversized artifacts, simply wrote them off as votive offerings. But when you repeat the finding of these things over and over and over again, and they fit a certain dimensional size, it's just that wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. I mean, if people want to bury themselves with giant artifacts because they think they'll be giant, why would you stick to like a uniform size? Just make them freaking as big as a house. Whatever. It's just saying. It's just doesn't make any sense. They didn't find any skeletal remains with the things, but they instantly said, "Well, it must have been votive. It had to be." Right, because nobody could be any taller than us, average-sized human beings, during that time period, including the Native Americans, which doesn't bear out the findings by the people who research height and growth when they say that the Plains Indians in the 1800s were among the largest people in the world. So, all these little tiny Indian guys is, it's just a joke. This was all the bias ingrained into with the Smithsonian and all of these things. They like that bias. Nobody corrected these things in the past. It's all intentional. People like Alex Herdliska screwed it all up for everybody around the world. He's international fame because he came from wherever he came, Latvia, or something like that, or some Slavic country, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, something like that. Wherever he came from there, he's a big hero over there and whatnot. I mean, well, he's a punk trying to bury the past for our sake. Okay, and because he's such an anti-religion, got the nuns wrapped his knuckles too many times or whatever it is, whatever reason, it's just you just leave your rationale behind because of that. It's just you have to look at everything objectively, and he's just refused to believe anything, even to when he was finally, stepped down as head of the Bureau of Ethnology, the African Smithsonian. His contemporary researchers at the time that were out there in the field had discovered human habitation in the Americas long before he accepted those dates to be. He only believed that it could possibly be like 4 or 5 thousand years ago, and that was it. And he went up to Alaska, digging up, people who were buried like last year and whatnot, and the native peoples, they got all mad at him because he's like digging their relatives up. The guy was out of his mind. And this is the guy who is writing policy for archaeology and anthropology for, up to our time today. It's still ingrained in, academic education in colleges. Okay. All his thoughts, all his, corrupt thoughts about all these things that were incorrect. And now, as it turns out, that nobody was crossing on the Bering Land Bridge at all. They all came by boat. You just read about the 30,000-year-old stone tools. They didn't come over the land or whatever. Maybe some did or whatever, but they didn't come by land. They all came by boat, which means like cavemen coming by boat anywhere in the world. There could be anybody at any time coming to America. So this is going to Harry Hubbard in the Illinois cave and his buddy Paul Shafranki, who's just a genius. And they talk about this hybrid ancient language found on the stone artifacts there and everything. It's just amazing stuff about the Illinois cave because of the artifacts. Besides Harry's, comparative analysis of historical and scientific books from different time periods, what they say, and all the nonsense that they put out, and all the stuff that you didn't hear from all these things that haven't been republished for, reasons. Want to bury that stuff. If they could, they'd burn every single one. And Harry's a cat guy, so he's got to be a friend. Any cat guy is a friend of mine. Anyway, guys, I thought you might enjoy that article there. It gives us a little hope about, people finding, in the field of archaeology and anthropology, finding giant skeletal remains and not immediately dismissing it and calling it rare cases of gigantism. This one they had to, eat their hats because it's more than one skeletal and a group of them. And so Now things are different. See? Anyway, I thought you might enjoy that article that Harry sent me there. And thanks, Harry, very much for sending me that. I enjoyed it very much. Gives us all a little bit of hope and maybe a little bit of pause, too, to think about things over again, how fantastic the past must have been. All right, guys. Anyway, hope you like that. Do hit the like button. If you're not a subscriber, please do subscribe. We entertain some very different ideas on this channel. I hope that's what would attract people here and not hear the same old nonsense, government approved nonsense that you can hear on all these other channels. They're going to talk about nonsensical things that there are no facts for whatsoever. All right. Anyway, guys, Bugcat7 signing out. Peace.